comments from our chairperson. Susan, did you have anything you wanted to say to bring us together as the May 15th Economic Development Finance/Funding Working Group?
I want to thank everybody for coming again and showing up to this working group. And I think I have a little bit of time to talk about some, bureaucratic directional stuff after we hear from Shannon. So if you've been wondering, what you're doing here, hopefully we'll clarify it a little bit more. And we appreciate that you're coming in and sticking with us while we're getting everything figured out in the scope of this much larger project. So appreciate that.
Indeed.
And then I'll let you introduce Josh, but I will say I'm very excited to have Shannon here. She did this presentation for us a similar presentation a couple of years ago for our Economic Development Summit. And it really is a good example of not just financing, but also sort of looking at something that a community wants, going through the growing pains of actually doing it, and then coming out the other side and everybody's happy. So I'm looking forward to hearing sort of where they are now. And I'll give it back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so, as we know, this working group is really, especially in this first phase of the working group, is about level setting on key concepts that are drawn from traditional economic development, as well as identifying those that may be unique to the new context of California Jobs First planning and generally more inclusive economic development strategies and actions. And we start regular meetings, which are happening once a month on the second Wednesday of the month. Or is it the third Wednesday of the month? Maybe I should get that right. I think it's the third Wednesday of the month, because the first Wednesday of the month, we're now doing our deep dives and special topics. But this meeting, we usually begin with a project like this one as an example to draw from how things have been moved in different parts of the region, using different financing vehicles, funding vehicles, and really with an eye to understand some of those technical aspects, as well as how they might pertain to, economic development goals and outcomes at the local level. So we're lucky to have Shannon Riley, the Deputy City Manager from the great city of Ukiah, and to hear about the Downtown Ukiah Streetscape Project. So with that as an introduction, Shannon, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you everyone for your time on a warm afternoon. I'll try to keep it as light and brief as possible. Many of us in our cities have been through streetscape projects, and these can be amazing, transformative projects, and they can also be completely disruptive. And so what I want to do today, I guess, is talk to you a little bit about how we got where we are, how we managed to nearly complete this project. We're about to finish up phase 2 in the first part of July. And importantly, how we paid for it. So the streetscape project.
So just a note, Shannon, it looks like when you clicked into the talking side, we're back to seeing the full. Yeah, there you go. So maybe click. There you go.
Does that work?
There you go. Yep.
Thank you for
now
pointing
you're.
that out. Okay, now we got full screen again.
Yeah.
So this was a really big project. You can see the buildings in the background here are kind of muted out, but just by the density of them, you can see that this is our downtown core. This is where our plaza is. This is where our courthouse is. This is the historic downtown. And so this is a very long stretch of street. And the way we got here is that this was truly the center of town. This was Highway 101. And so these are some before pictures of what we were dealing with. So we had basically a 4-lane freeway going through our street, highway, I guess. It didn't have a center divide. And it still looked and in many ways functioned like a state highway. And so you can see this entire span of pavement here. You can see the utility poles. There's fairly narrow sidewalks. You can start to get an idea of how bad the pavement, how poor it was in its condition. If you look on the bottom screen here, you see this wall of cars. This is an important picture because this is what it looked like from a pedestrian's point of view trying to cross State Street. So in addition to 4 lanes of traffic, 2 in each direction, you've got parking lanes. There's no center turn lanes at all. And then on top of that, you can see the condition of the pavement down there. And then over on the right, you can see the utility lines. Most of us have probably had the experience of trying to take a picture of something that looked like a beautiful downtown or something. And then when you look at it, all you see is the power lines. So we realize that this is the perspective, particularly to visitors to our community. So it was the former Highway 101. We had infrastructure under the ground that was about 100 years old. The water and sewer lines was definitely unsafe, and it was definitely a barrier to economic development. So it was bypassed in about 1969. This is important to note, this is before cities got money to mitigate the impacts. So some of the cities like Cloverdale and Willits, when they got bypassed, the cities got funding to help redo that streetscape project. We just got bypassed. And then we had a 4-lane street as our main street now. So finally, by about 2005, the community said, enough, this is super unsafe. I won't let my kids walk on State Street. I won't cross the street myself. I've nearly been in an accident. City, do something about it. So I say that because to people who don't love the finished plan, and there are some of those, like this was a terrible idea of the city's. This wasn't the city's idea. The community demanded that we make this main street safer. And so we did what cities did. We hired a consultant and we said, give us some options. What would a safer State Street look like? And they explored all kinds of scenarios, including making State Street one way in one direction, taking Main Street, making it one way in another direction. There were all kinds of options. And ultimately, after all the studies were done, it came down to what's called a road diet on State Street with some additional features. So we said, okay, well, here's the plan. How do we fund it now? So we did some studies. In 2008, we were awarded some funds through MCOG. We got the plan approved by the council in about 2009. In 2011, we were awarded funds. In 2012, we were awarded more funds. And so here's what happened is like the project progressed, from conception to approval. But as that happened, it also grew. It grew because requirements from Caltrans and other jurisdictions changed. For example, some of you might know that if you do so much as put an asphalt overlay on a street, you have to upgrade all of the curb ramps to current ADA standards every time. You can't just pave a street anymore. So now the curb ramps have to be done. And now we're like, oh, the trees are tearing up the sidewalk. It'd be nice to have wider sidewalks. And we can't just put lipstick on this pig, right? We've got 100-year-old water and sewer lines under there. It would be dumb to not replace them at this time. So the project is just, mushrooming here as we speak. We are gathering more funds for it, and we're begging, patience to these granting agencies saying, we will spend the money, we will spend it, but we also have to do this, right? So it just keeps getting bigger. But finally, around 2018, we get to the environmental review, and then finally the design phase. We update the city council. Because this has taken so long, we're like, we're 10, 15 years into this project now. We also have to keep re-educating the community So every time we go to council, it's like we feel like we're starting over again. We had buy-in and now we have to start again. And now we have to convince the fire department again that it's safe. So it was this very long process. We did continue gaining more money throughout the project. We're also doing research. Any of us who embark on large projects always take a look at other communities and see who's done something similar, what worked and what didn't. And for better or for worse, Fort Bragg had done a streetscape project, and the sequencing of the project made it really difficult for the merchants. That was their side street. They were also awarded money to do their main street, which happens to also be a highway. And because the community and the business community in particular was so frustrated with the first phase, the city council in Fort Bragg ended up rejecting their second streetscape project that would have improved their main street. So a loss for Fort Bragg. We got the money from that project and we had the benefit of learning from their mistakes. So 2019 final approval, we've put all the funding together, and I'll get a little bit more into the details of that later. We started the project in 2020. What also happened in the beginning of 2020? It was like the apocalypse in Ukiah. Okay, we've got a global pandemic, the economy's tanking, stores are closed, and look what we've done to our streets now. It ended up actually being perfect timing. We could not have planned this, but it just so happened that as we were digging up the streets and the sidewalks, some of these businesses were closed. They were mandated to be closed through the shelter-in-place order. The additional happy consequence or coincidence was the fact that these businesses were eligible for all kinds of funding assistance that we could not have provided as a city. If any of you had the benefit of working back when we had redevelopment funds, this was the kind of thing we could have assisted businesses with. We could have given grants or low interest loans to businesses to mitigate the impacts of a construction project like that, but we just don't have those discretionary funds anymore. So these businesses were able to get PPP loans and grants and all kinds of stuff, and it actually worked out really well for them. But when I say we tore up the downtown, I mean we tore up the downtown. We were super strategic about it. We had weekly construction meetings with the entire construction crew. And I say we because as the deputy city manager and the person who's largely responsible for economic development at my agency, I was embedded with our public works team in those weekly construction meetings because I was looking at this project from the business perspective rather than just the construction perspective. Contractors are always going to look for the fastest, cheapest, most efficient way to get it done. And that might mean digging up 4 streets at once. I was there and I had the support of our public works team to say, not acceptable. We're doing 1 block at a time and we're moving on. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. And that was one of the lessons that we learned from Fort Bragg. So, for example, the image on the left is where we were replacing either the water or the sewer lines, but the work was all confined to that block. That means all the side streets were open, traffic was open, sidewalks were always open. But ultimately, the project did include new water and sewer lines. We undergrounded all the electric utility. We replaced the sidewalks and widened them. We added new street trees. Oh, that's really tragic when you have to cut down mature trees on your main street. Oh, talk about, that was a big one, to see your whole street naked. But the thing is when you do a project like this, you finally have the opportunity to do it right. Those old trees, as beautiful as they were jacking up the sidewalks because they didn't have enough irrigation and the tree wells weren't adequate. Everything is built right and the trees are thriving now. So it's all worth it in the end. All kinds of pedestrian enhancements in terms of sidewalks and new crosswalks and boulevards, new landscaping, new streetlights, new traffic signals, new fire hydrants. So literally from below the ground up, a whole new downtown. So this whole project took about 10 years of planning. This is just phase 1. 16 months of construction, and 66 weeks of emails and hand delivering flyers. This is so important, and I can't stress this enough. This is not about the financial part, but communication with your community, especially the businesses that are impacted, is so critical. So we had a dedicated Facebook page, we had weekly emails, and we would include a lot of these construction photos. People love to see photos of what's going on. There's going to be people always who will say, "Oh, I'm not going downtown until the project's over." Well, at least this way they can see what's going on. So weekly emails, but then we would, on top of that, we would hand deliver these bright orange construction flyers to every single doorway in the project area every Friday, rain or shine. And that says, this is what to expect next week. So that was a lot, but it paid off. This was our construction management team. And then we kicked off the final project with a special event. It was still during COVID, but we had a car show right on the main street. The smoke, remember, oh my gosh, on top of the global pandemic, we had fires those years, so it was smoky in the valley. But this is what State Street looks like now compared to it. It's thriving, there's new economic activity, new businesses. So how did we get there? A lot of the funding did flow through MCOG, Mendocino Council of Governments. You probably all have something similar. So we did get funding from STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. And that one funded a lot of the aesthetic stuff, the streetscape kind of, it was the bulb outs, the curb ramps, the wide sidewalks, the new street lights, the pretties, we like to call them. So the STIP funds paid for that. We also got federal funds, the HSIP program, and those largely funded the road diet. We narrowed that 4-lane highway to 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane, infinitely safer and more efficient. So those were a couple of the primary funding sources, but we also in 2017 passed a dedicated sales tax measure to improve our streets. If you haven't done this in your community, I highly recommend that you do. We had widespread support for it, passed with really strong numbers. Even more importantly, having that dedicated sales tax allows us to access a very important program through Caltrans called the Local Partnership Program, the LPP program. So because we have our own dedicated funding source for streets, we are also allowed to access an annual allocation of funds from Caltrans, and we can apply for competitive grants through Caltrans. So in addition to that dedicated sales tax, we've been able to access millions of dollars for additional projects and really leverage our funds to do much more improvements. And then further, when interest rates were really low, remember that, y'all? That was a while ago, but interest rates got really low for a minute. So we bonded in hopes that we could take an additional $15–16 million and just knock out as many of these streets as we could. We're all in a state of deferred maintenance now because of the way the state and the federal governments shifted the money for streets. All of our streets across the state are in terrible condition unless you have these dedicated funds. So this deferred maintenance had gotten so bad that now we just knew that we couldn't just do one street at a time. Like there was serious damage to repair. So that's what we're doing right now. Huge sections of Ukiah are under construction. It's pretty frustrating. The community is largely bearing with us, but I know their patience is wearing thin. But our hope is that in about 3 years, we'll have improved all of the major streets in Ukiah, and we'll just be in a state of maintenance at that point. An important point about Ukiah that may not be applicable to a lot of other cities is that we do own our own water, sewer, and electric utilities. So that allowed us to use some of those funds to replace the utilities. And I can honestly say that if I'd had to coordinate this project with PG&E, outside water agencies, then it would have been much more difficult. But this is the end result. This is literally the very same area in the top picture as in the after picture. So now we've got our road diet in place. We've got beautiful landscaping and trees. These trees were only a couple months old when they were planted. We put nice big trees in there, and they're absolutely thriving, especially the ones that are in the bulb outs. I'm sorry, the bioswales. So the garden area on the bottom left is a bioswale. You can see the little inlet there next to the crosswalk. So that's designed to gather the water from the storm drain and filter it through the soils before it gets to our treatment plant and our rivers. But the trees that are in those bioswales, their trunks are 6 to 8 inches wide already, just 3 years later. Oh, that's the end of my slideshow. But I'm here to answer any questions. I think for me, the big takeaways of this project as we embark on the completion of it, that's not the right term to use, but we're nearly complete with phase 2, which extends the project both to the north and the south. Much of the same features. We've nearly improved all of State Street now. There's one little gap on the north side. We're applying for grant funding there. Communication is key. Education with the community is key, and get all the money you need to do it right, because it's going to be more expensive than you think it is. But we have a beautiful new downtown, and we couldn't be happier with the results. Just super grateful for the support of our city council, for our city manager, and super grateful that our public works and our construction teams allowed us to take this much more collaborative approach to this project. I'm happy to take it. I'll take the slideshow down, unless do you think we need to see the pictures again, or we good?
Oh, I think that's great. Yeah, that was great to see all that put together nice and concisely. The pictures say a lot. And I think just to reflect on, for the subject matter of this working group and what we have seen previously, one of the things that is clear and you highlighted is, these projects are, decades long, from conception to, compilation of funds and building the capital stack, that's, and too is, noteworthy here, from your various grant programs to your bonding, the local sales tax measure, and then the utility and water funds. I mean, that is a capital stack. And so those are consistent messages that we've heard from other presentations. And I just think that just a fundamental message for people thinking about these big projects to have in mind: the duration, the diverse capital stack piece. And then just kind of a little bit on a question side, you did mention like the renewed economic activity downtown, but I think someone could say, well, what does redoing the streetscape have to do with economic development? I mean, somebody could I've heard such things said before, and I think would you mind talking a little bit about what are some of the outcomes that you're seeing in terms of like this new activity, and from events maybe to new businesses and sort of the private sector sort of now coming in and reinvesting in the downtown?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So I mentioned previously the loss of redevelopment, and that's where we would have purchased blighted properties and reinvigorated them, and we just can't do that anymore. So what is our lane as a city in terms of economic development? Infrastructure. That's our lane. So if we demonstrate to the community and our visitors that we're investing in our community by improving that infrastructure, we're making it beautiful, we're making it safe, we're making it functional, that sends a message both to our community members and to investors that this is a place that's investing in themselves, that cares about their community. On a more kind of macro level, by replacing all of that infrastructure, we have a more efficient water and wastewater system right now. we reduced the inflow into our wastewater treatment plant by millions of gallons because all of those 100-year-old pipes were leaking. So our ratepayers, our staff were treating all of that stormwater that was just leaking into the system. So we have a more efficient water and wastewater system now. We replaced all of the sewer laterals for all of the buildings along that stretch. That typically would have been the property or the business owner's responsibility. So that's a savings to them and a huge expense that they're not going to have to pay down the road. So we have seen new restaurants open. We've seen some fantastic outdoor dining establishments because the sidewalks are 12 feet wide. So they're designed to accommodate that already. So we do have a system in place. They have to rent that space from us. It's not a gift of public funds. But we've also seen some very important buildings sold. And honestly, you know, some of it is to real estate agents who understand that investment and what that's going to result in. But they are starting to turn over. So in spite of the difficult economy, in spite of coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing, and Jeff Lucas is seeing and helping with this, businesses in Ukiah are selling to new buyers, to young buyers. We're attracting a new group of people. The pandemic allowed a lot of people to work remotely, and there are people who landed here, very prestigious finance jobs and real estate jobs and things like that. Now they can work from home. And we're hearing firsthand from them that they chose Ukiah because they saw the city investing in itself.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a
those
quick
are-
question, Shannon?
Those are great. Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. So how long has the city owned the utilities, Shannon, that are oftentimes run by either like a mutual water company, for example? So you have a long-term experience with that. I'm just curious about how long.
Actually, the city of Ukiah was formed specifically to provide fire and water service to a community. So nearly since its inception. So we have a
Right.
long history. We're working on a really interesting project right now. The state of California Water Board has a program called SAFER. Don't ask me what all those letters stand for. It's an acronym, but the point of it is to encourage consolidation of water agencies where there are weaker, less sustainable agencies that could be supported by a larger agency. So we're in the process of consolidating with 2 adjacent water agencies, and we expect more will come on board because the city of Ukiah has capacity to serve all of them. So we do anticipate that we will serve an even larger region in the future. I say that because while some of you in the room may not have your own water agencies, there may be opportunities to partner and funding, significant funding that comes with that from the State Water Board, and that's worth investigating.
Thank you, Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
See that Greg asked a question in the chat where he said, we have a lot of smaller incorporated cities with highways or former highways running through them. Are those sorts of projects eligible for CJF funding? What is CJF
That's a great question,
funding?
Greg. I don't know what CJF funding is.
California jobs
first, dude.
Okay.
Come on.
Oh,
The reason for the season.
probably. I haven't looked at it in that context because we already had funding for ours. So that's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna say on that, just go back to the capital stack aspect of Shannon's project and the time duration. And I would, my initial assumption here would be that, whether even if the volume of the dollars and the jobs for program that are available, would likely not give you a complete project for more than one project and so I don't know that I would look to a road for a road project of this scale to that funding. That would be my initial assumption.
Well, or even the initial planning or scoping. I'm just wondering, I mean,
That
this is
planning, Greg, is
the California
absolutely
Jobs First
critical.
group, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so one of the things that the city of
Yeah.
Ukiah has done really well in the last few years is planned ahead. We saw this infrastructure money coming, and so we started designing every project we could imagine. And when that funding came available, we all knew it was going to happen eventually. We were first in line to apply. And so take advantage of those planning grants, and get those projects engineered, even if you don't have funding for the implementation yet. It's absolutely critical to be ready.
And I also think maybe we'll
Okay, so
address some of those.
Amanda's got a good clarification.
I was gonna say, we'll probably address some of those things today as Amanda talks about states requirements, and I'll talk a little bit more about this group too, so.
Anyone else have specific questions on the Ukiah streetscape story? Okay. Thank you, Shannon, for making
you,
the time in
everybody.
your day to give us that talk, and it will live on the website for others to see. So if anyone asks you again, you can say, go take a look over here at the EDF website.
All right. Well, keep fighting the good fight, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's a good segue. We have kind of a couple items that are a bit administrative. One was an update from Amanda relative to some of the more recent guidance from the CJF higher ups. And then also we were going to do some kind of housekeeping notes from Susan, but maybe Amanda, since we've broached the subject, would it make sense for you to jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do it and happy to be with you all. I think I have a couple slides just to keep myself organized. Are you guys seeing a slideshow right now?
Yes.
My screen. Great. Well, before I jump into that, I do want to address the topic of much concern of late, which is, of course, the governor's budget. And for those of you who are following along with some of what's going on, California Jobs First funding is on the cut list. I think it's about 150 million on the chopping block. We do anticipate that that would be cut from the implementation funding, as we are already under contract for the catalyst funding. However, I am not an expert on the workings of the California State Legislature, and anything I say on that would be speculative. So that, is something where the emails are flying, figuring out our advocacy efforts. And I do also just want to recognize that some of the folks who really do provide essential services to our region's economic development efforts, such as our SBDCs, are facing some pretty rough cuts as well. So I'm just grateful to have this community of experts around, and we want to make sure we're supporting folks to engage with this process through advocacy letters or however we can. So that is my spiel on that. In the meantime, work marches forward. This process has been a little bit confusing to follow at times, and so just take a moment to center us in it. I do want to say we have, for folks who really just want to see where we are in this planning phase, we pulled together an 11-minute YouTube video, which I have just dropped in the chat, that our communications associate Leonie narrates. But for the purposes of our talk today, one of our major deliverable coming out of this planning phase, which ends September 1st, of course, is this investment map, this regional roadmap that is delivered in 2 parts per state guidance. The first part, Regional Plan Part 1, we will be releasing for collaborative and public comment in June, and it includes these data snapshots, our partner mapping, economic, climate, and public health analyses, labor market, industry cluster analyses, and SWOT analysis. Part 2 is the aspect that I think we'd like our sector tables who are leading that work may like to engage with you all on. And that is the development of regional development strategies. And here's where we've had some updated guidance in the state of what they would like to see in our roadmap. The most sort of salient thing that we received in the updated guidance is some new kind of language and typology around strategies. So I think previously we thought of our strategies as being sector development strategies, and then, sort of the cross-cutting strategies that are all those enabling factors we know we need to consider, such as, housing for our workforce, capacity in our grid, that infrastructure issues that Shannon spoke of at the top of our meeting, et cetera. But the state's actually given us 2 new categories. So they'd like us to discuss sector neutral strategies, which I'm going to say are really poorly defined. And we're going to try to figure out exactly what is encompassed in that. But generally speaking, things around economic mobility. And then community development strategies, which they've now indicated to us are optional to include in our plan. But those are the things that are really, really dear and important and been elevated through our collaborative over and over. That's where they put, housing and mental health. And we really, I think, see those things as more closely related to economic development than maybe the state is thinking of the California Jobs First program. So I just want to highlight that as a tension that we will be navigating in this deliverable, which we're hoping to have out for your review and feedback and council closer to the end of July. So here, I think just to review how we're pulling together those sector strategies, step 1 was to identify 4 priority sectors. And we did that in consultation with the collaborative. We had 2 rounds of surveying that you guys may have recalled, because I know several of you filled out surveys for us when we launched into the project to figure out, what felt important, what you see as the drivers, both historic and future of our economy. So we did do that work with you all. We also relied on previous scholarships. So some of you may be familiar with the Targets of Opportunity study that was done for our region and a couple additional northern counties. That was basically an industry cluster analysis effort that was it had been updated in 2021, I think, or 2. So it was relatively recent. And we kind of crosswalked what we were seeing in our data, what you all told us, and that study to arrive at these 4 groupings that some of them are quite broad, but we're working with working lands and blue economy, timbers included in that, along with all our farming efforts and things happening in our fisheries, renewable and resilient energy, health and caregiving, and arts, culture, and tourism were the nodes that we identified as our significant drivers. And we then pulled a lot of data, which we'll be releasing, as I said, next month for comment. And then we assembled basically working groups around those nodes and recruited leads. I think I saw one of our wonderful leads, Sabrina Klein, on the call with us, who helps us with the arts, culture, and tourism work. Some of the groups are quite large. I think Working Lands and Blue Economy tops 40 people. Some for our more nascent sectors are small groups. Renewable and resilient energy, I think, is about 10 folks that meet monthly. So it's all over, but we did try very hard to get good regional representation in all those groups. And they have been getting together and working on creating asset maps, doing sector-specific SWOT analyses, and drafting up those strategies, which I'll take us through quickly, as they do have first drafts into us. They sent us last month, and we went through in our in-person meeting. So this was what we asked of them to do: create 1 to 3 sector development strategies and work with us to craft them into that roadmap. We do have that preliminary draft, as I mentioned. And then here's where it gets sticky. The state, in an update that occurred a couple months ago, removed the requirement to name projects in the deliverable, with the hopes that that might help people take strategies more seriously. And so, because that was also going to be really substantial work that needs to begin in earnest when we have fully funded positions that happen in Catalyst, we went ahead and removed that requirement of their contracts as well. But I can say that the tables are considering all the projects that we've had in our inventory and crosswalking them with the strategies they're developing to see that we're getting something kind of coherent that is resonates with what people are interested in investing in our region. I think I can go through that. That's just their timeline. We will wrap up that drafting of those sector strategies by the end of June. And then we'll need to work, I think, with you all to figure out what those cross-cutting or sector neutral strategies will be. And that will look like probably a series of meetings and workshops over the summer. But in the meantime, I did want to give everyone who wasn't with us in person at the end of April flavor for the things that folks are coming up with on those tables as strategies. In the working lands and blue economy, of course, we have a lot of that value chain development work, those regional food systems work, so building markets locally and also outside our region, marketing campaigns to help promote the products that come out of the sector, which is one of our traded sectors. And then other things like for the blue economy node, advancing that oceanic research and using that to drive innovation for their sector. In renewable resilient energy, the interest has been around really creating that regional workforce for this very nascent industry when we talk about offshore wind. So really looking at like very comprehensive, holistic, sort of like case management approaches to building workforce. They call that the Clean Energy Core as an idea. Community Energy Resilience and Reliability Initiative is where a lot of the really great work in our region that's being done around microgrids comes into play and fosters circular energy economy, looking at biomass and biochar, all that great stuff that I'm still learning about. And for our arts, culture, tourism table, really focus on creating a regional identity around us as a destination, as a place with great cultural attractions, including that branding and marketing piece, expanding skills training for folks involved in these. And this is a very, once again, a wide-ranging set of industries that we've brought together in this cluster. And that creative placemaking and placekeeping efforts, which I think it connects to some of that work that Shannon highlighted for us around the importance of walkable downtowns. So hopefully that you can sort of see some of the connections to infrastructure that might come in here, connections to entrepreneurship, of course, that workforce development that's really, really core. All of these things weave through all of these strategies. Oh, I forgot health and caregiving. Oh my goodness. Our fourth note, health and caregiving. This is really, and I think they recognize and center this in the strategy, that this is really a support sector. It's another one of those things that provides essential infrastructure for all our other economic development efforts because we are so constrained by being medically underserved. So it's holding up all the great work that's already underway to try to grow our own health workforce, and doing all these things with an eye to improving health equity and those social determinants of health. So those are how they articulate their strategies. And from there, after June 30th, once we get it all together, lay it out in front of us, it'll be identifying those cross-cutting themes, that workforce development, that housing, that broadband, working with our broader collaborative to define our strategies and delivering this investment map to the state and to our region at the end of August. So I know that on our horizon, talking about how to bring the expertise in this working group to the strategy development effort, to this project identification effort. I have some slides here about the catalyst timeline. I don't know, Josh and Susan, if you want to go into that now or have some discussion first.
Yeah, I mean, one thought, just to the point that we have been talking about like last couple of kind of staff level meetings we've been having is just about, the acknowledging, I guess, the desire that may be out there that, hey, we want to focus on projects. And in fact, we have been, kind of developing this, recommendation for how the Economic Development Finance Working Group may be able to offer, feedback or some evaluation for funding and financing feasibility as, to the sector tables as they consider, coming up with recommendations or priorities. But I think it's acknowledging that, that all of that work is, still yet to come in terms of what is immediately the subject of this working group, and that really our continued focus on sort of education and capacity building, understanding examples of projects that and things that have been successful, so that when it does come time to jump into the project, we'll be best prepared. Maybe I just explained my feelings on that, but I don't know if you have anything more you want to add on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think actually that this exchange that Greg had with Shannon's presentation is like a perfect example, I think, of the work ahead of us, right? Where we have an inventory of over 100 economic development projects that people are putting forward as, hey, is this aligned? Is this kind of within field of things we might fund either through the program or help fund through other sources? And that question of, is that best use of very, very flexible pre-development funding, or what are the other ways we can get to fully funded? Also acknowledging that this is $9 million in pre-development funds that we have and an ever shrinking pot of implementation funding, right? And so the opportunity within the project is much, much smaller really than the opportunity outside the project when we look at all these calls that are coming out every day for the Inflation Reduction Act funds and so on and so forth. So your help connecting the dots, figuring out highest and best use, and yeah, getting feasibly fundable projects is yeah, that's what we're looking to you all for. And they have to be aligned with those strategies, right? So it was hard work to begin before we had some of those sketched out, and we're getting there on those.
And Amanda, I don't know if this is just throwing fuel on a fire, but to me, I think something that is so important when we start going forward and looking at projects is, what are the implementation? What is it that they're ultimately looking for in implementation? And is that reflected by what we're seeing from our region's desires about what to do? And the reason I'm saying that is because I feel like this is the group that hopefully will bridge that gap.
Yes, thank you for that, Susan. I think the biggest gap, just from having scanned through, is that we have a lot of really wonderful but very locally situated projects. And to compete with the other regions and to really hit the nail on the head with the CJF vision, we need those regionally significant projects. So I think there are going to have to be a lot of scaling discussions, get things up to scale.
And I know that Dana was planning to join this call, but she offered just a few comments to me last week about this budget cut, and thinking about how that's, will affect all the work here. Is it really makes the highest and best use deployment of this catalyst money really important. And really with the idea that it should focus, it should, consider, I guess, setting up for being able to go after other money, federal money was kind of the message, so you know, that means identifying just maybe a smaller set of projects, or maybe some stratification of locally important projects, and a bunch of strategically deploying the money so that there can be some really foundational things set in place, and maybe that's gonna emanate up from these working groups about what those priorities are. But yeah, really setting up to build a capital stack with other than CJF money. It's kind of funny. Walter's got his hand raised here.
Yeah, my question is for Amanda, and I don't know if she has an answer or not, but I'm a little bit concerned when I'm hearing about the budget situation and what you're talking about potentially being cut from the entire sort of program. What about the tribal set aside? Have you heard anything about that $25 million set aside? It seems like the catalyst idea actually probably will benefit everybody because it pushed a lot of that money out ahead and well in advance the cut. But that seems to be lagging. I don't hear too much about that $25 million set aside, and I'm not sure if that's because somebody's not paying attention. Maybe that might be me. I don't know. I'm just
No, Walter, it's not you, trust me. I have things I can share and none of them are good, just so you know. They have not definitively said that the 25 million is in the cut or in the delay. It was supposed to be in the first release it was part of the first $100 million release. And I haven't heard anything about that. What I have heard is they have tried for a third time and failed for a third time to identify the intermediary who is supposed to effectively administer that program, since there are so many legal issues with the way that, with the state trying to contract with tribes directly to do this work. And so people once again applied, and then they found out that I don't know what it is exactly, but they can't move forward and identify that intermediary. So the whole process remains completely stalled out.
wow. That's sort of shocking to me because I've been kind of pointing to this sort of loosely created kind of process from the beginning, and it was really sort of concerning to me up front because I was investing so much time in hopes that I would be able to sort of capitalize on the work that I've put in. But I'm all about people, so as long as at some point we get people benefiting from what we're trying to do, I guess I'll be good.
Thank you, Walter. I'll share one other thing, and we'll definitely follow up with you about this, which is we work with an advisor who represents, I think it's the Native American Chamber of Commerce on one of the other regions collaboratives, and she has sort of an ear to the ground on this, and we'll be talking and seeing it might be time for some advocacy letters, and just, making sure that we put our opinion on this in writing and deliver it. I think that there's some appetite for that across our region, and we'll certainly come to Hoopa Valley Tribe and see what we should be communicating up about the situation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Bridget?
I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So when we're talking about the sector neutral and community development strategies, those are the ones that are not supported by the state, but we're trying to somehow make them part of our regional plan, correct? And that's the housing, broadband, infrastructure, mental health. Okay. I thought when we were in this, in a previous meeting, we were not even going to see applications that didn't apply to the criteria that the state set that went through the sector tables first. So how is this group meant to find other funding sources for the ones that don't meet the state's criteria?
So we have a lot of projects related to housing, related to mental health and well-being, and it's, you know, our message out in other rural regions are stepping alongside us and also communicating this. If Dana were here, she could confirm. Is that really fundamentally misunderstands our constraints here, right? To say like we have to grow our workforce, but not account for those issues. And so we do want to make them at least visible in our plan. And there's nothing that prevents us from providing the capacity supports of the Catalyst program to, you know, for example, to do that grant writing, to bring together the partners. We have resources for all of that, and we can absolutely invest them in initiatives related to housing. They, I think, just want to make clear that their interest in California Jobs First is those industry-led strategies. And so for implementation funding, which once again is shrinking all the time, that would be the most strategic place, I think, to put the money.
So this group will actually see proposals that do not meet the criteria for implementation funding. Okay.
You'll see it.
This group exists in anticipation that we're not going to be able to get all of the funding through the state. And so we're trying to create our own interest to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I would just, from what I'm hearing, you know, this is what you know, the state's kind of pushing outward is, you know, use the dollars in hand and the capacity in hand to, you know, develop a ability regionally to, you know, go after these development funding opportunities strategically. And like, you know, I think the Shannon Riley talk on you know, the 10-year horizon for the street project, you know, they went after grant 1, grant 2, grant 3, got those together, held them in abeyance until they, you know, were able to get other money. And then they did, you know, their bond measure, they did their local sales tax measure, and over that 10-year period, they built up the money they needed to do the work. So, you know, I think what, you know, we've been doing in this working group as far as showcasing, hey, these are, you know, existing economic development financing and funding mechanisms, and hoping that we can, you know, those will help, knowing more about those and having a broad sort of network within the Redwood region who do have some level set understanding of these mechanisms will help the projects that, you know, are put forward as priorities be more successful, and help those that may not rise up in the jobs first priority set to also be more successful, but maybe with later funding sources and other funding sources, but still kind of taking advantage of all these different tools to build up that capital stack.
Yeah, that's great, Judge. I'll just share one other thing. I think our executive director, Don, says this better than I can, but it's, you know, it wasn't a $5 million planning effort to figure out how to spend $9 million, right? It was a $5 million planning effort for us to create an investment map for our region and then go out and do whatever it took to finance it. So that original California Jobs First funding is supposed to just get us started. And so that has in no way changed. This is still really about increasing our capacity to get more things through pre-development, get more things shovel ready, and yeah, move on our dreams, right?
Layla.
So this is jumping the gun a little bit, but I'm going to bring it up because we've talked about it informally in the past. One of the daydreams that Susan and a few other people had ages ago now, gosh, it's got to be 2 years ago, was of a well-organized network of development project consultants operating region-wide in a way that allowed people who needed pre-development support to access well-coordinated support, and people who were available to provide that to network with one another to form, informal short-term project teams and then disband, to share insights so that whoever was working on projects within our region had the best intelligence possible, especially if they were coming to do work in our region from outside. And then a second layer to that was this question about, as a region, we don't necessarily have a piece of formal infrastructure that might exist in singular or multiple forms in more urban areas. An economic development, not district, but let's say agency of some sort that is willing to either create or scale up the capacity to field technical assistance grants, to field technical pre-development loans, to receive and handle the fiscal hosting and administration for some of these massive flows of non jobs first dollars that we're hoping we're going to be able to entice and leverage into this region based on the projects we're identifying, and probably others as well. So I'm saying all of this to bring this back into the conversation, because as I'm hearing the state being forced to be not just confusing, but now financially unreliable, that is out of our control. I'm curious to know what is in our control and what infrastructure, not just funding flows for projects and beautiful capital stacks, but what infrastructure for the long term we need to be thinking about creating, whether it is for the region as California defined it for ourselves, across the 4 counties and all tribal lands, or subdivided in some fashion. It is disrespectful to put out a grand idea and then not offer a plan for how to get there, but that's what I'm doing.
I want to add to the idea of, this network of consultants who can help people with their capacity. We're not even talking about doing it for free. Right now, it's not just that people can't afford it and they can't afford it. It's that they're all so over capacity, all of our consultants are, that getting them together was part of the issue. So it was really a very small, kind of a small part of this bigger issue that Layla is talking about. It's what we were talking about.
Some examples of that do exist, right? Of this type of organization. So I think that's on the hopeful side. But I'll let Greg have the floor.
That may be a mistake.
I know. I was wondering up here.
We'll
Well,
take
part of the problem is that when we get to the big region level, right? We're trying to swallow a watermelon whole, and to use a graphic analogy, and that there is obviously a real downside to like breaking these into too small pieces. But that being said, we have, and I work with them, and I was just down in Southern Humboldt last week talking to the people there. We have these small communities who really who've been waiting for decades for help, and who haven't gotten it, and still aren't. A lot of words. And so I'm just, in terms of this, it may scare the consultants away when we say, okay, we need something that's too big. And I don't know the quality and the quantity and what was said in the conversations there, but can we pick 10 communities that are the worst off. Because ultimately we're going to have, quite honestly, both state and federal tightening over the next decade, I suspect. That the federal, even the federal government with all its largesse, that's ending, right? And at some point, once we get past this election, we're going to quit handing out the goodies and start trying to figure out how to deal with our deficit. So I have enough gray hair in my head now to have gone through 3 or 4 state budget crashes. We've lost SBDC funding, I don't know how many times, when trade and commerce went away, and blah, 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 blah. So I guess my point is let's pick just some and focus a little more, because I just feel like it's so big that what we're trying to do in some ways here, that it's just not going to happen. And even when the state had not be taking away our money, it was like the concept is way too big for even the funding they're trying to provide. And so when we tell them that, they go, oh, well, but we're going to provide you capacity to go find other money, which is a very typical state thing. And Josh, you've been around long enough. It's like, it's not a mandate. We gave you the ability to raise your own taxes. I was like, wait a minute. So, do we have, I mean, in your data, Amanda, I know you've been doing a lot of data work. I mean, what are the most economically distressed areas with the worst infrastructure? But I think another piece has the most potential, right? Because the notion of ghost towns is one that's passé, but those towns were absolutely a function of the economy, right? And we've interrupted that. So it's like, what are those places that are under the most distress, have the worst infrastructure and the greatest potential? And maybe that's where we should be focusing, and pick out some, and I hate to say winners and losers, but we're going to be, our small communities here and our projects are going to be competing for these dollars, and we've got to make sure as they dwindle that we're really putting them in the best place, and that we're not only providing development capacity to these places, but that the implementation, monitoring, and administration of these programs, that's going to have to be a long investment for these folks. If Oric is somehow able to secure millions of dollars for levee repairs and wastewater, great, but they have a part-time admin and that's it. So how do they even implement once the money is there? So these are going to be multiple year engagements with these folks. Anyway, end of rant. I'll be quiet now.
So, okay, Greg,
Yes.
I wanted to give you a map just as a party favor for coming, because you asked for one. This is our disinvested communities map, which according to the state definition is 90% of our region. So could use some further refinement. But I like what you suggested as an approach.
Yeah, and I think
Which
it's
I think is
also
really interesting, because when we think about capital flowing, I mean, we were talking about, we have lost in the last 5 or 8 years upwards of $1 billion+ in capital just from the drop in the cannabis industry, probably more, right? Capital is flowing through the economy, and the state said, well, here's tens of millions of dollars to try to turn that around. And so the scale is really, like, I don't know. I mean, when I was in Garberville, they say, what do we do? And I said, I don't have enough money. And we're a pretty big loan fund for what we do, but we're pretty small in the scale of things. So how we in this group, if we're making judgments on things, or whomever, how are we going to make those distinctions?
I think Susan had a good point in the chat on this one.
Yeah, so we are not going to be making judgments or even recommendations. The purpose of this group is to provide finance help and feedback on projects. We're not voting on anything. This
Yeah,
is
the
not a
recommendation
sector.
Well,
that-
granted, but the feedback has to be meaningful about whether or not these people have a chance for this or any other funding, right?
And to receive other funding, yeah. So that's what we'll be doing, but we're not going to be making any determinations about how projects are picked. And I'll get into part of that when I talk about sort of the bureaucratic part of the meeting before we go, so.
Yeah, and you know, I did mention recommendation earlier, but that was specific to a recommendation to this working group to consider a method for, you know, evaluating projects for their finance, funding, feasibility, and then providing that as some kind of way to support the sector table leads and coming up with their priority recommendations that would go up to the you know, main collaborative for that. But so if that's helpful, you know, I guess I'm hearing a lot of this discussion. Yes, with Greg saying lots of big resource people standing in a circle. Yeah. You know, it seems to me that a good example of or one of the most often held up examples of an organization of the type that I think Layla you may be envisioning is the Sierra it's blanking. What is the Sierra that Steve
Business-
Fritsch is
Sierra
the
Business
lead?
Council and a couple of related entities.
Yes, right. I mean, they cover a very large area and they have multiple sort of service providing fund revenue generating things that give them capacity. And they, you know, or serve as a economic development district and all of that stuff kind of combined. And that may be, you know, and then there's other, of course, the California Stewardship Network examples of you know, NGO structures like, you know, and all of those have various pros and cons. But some lasting entity makes sense. I would think would help as long as it's not a bunch of well-resourced people standing around watching the patient die, as Greg described here, which I think is a, you know, legitimate critique to some degree. Although I'd say that and I saw another comment here about being able to support looking at specific projects. See that one flow through here. Is that a Jeff Lucas comment? Susan. Yeah, okay, Susan. Yeah, Susan said that as an ongoing brain trust, I like to have this group being able to respond to projects that individual entities are working on. Right, and so that comes up with how one thought we had on evolving some of these meetings a little bit, less on historical look back examples and potentially more on sort of sector table focused highlight projects. Of course, when we talked about that, the idea then became, well, whose project gets highlighted and who, you know, becomes a subject of discussion by this group. If we could figure out an equitable way to answer that question, it seems like that could be a good use of this group's time. So, you know, if the first part is about our level setting work and the next part could start to merge into, okay, let's see what we can do with projects that are looking for that support. And maybe that's less about watching the patient die, Greg, and maybe that's about, you know, giving some,
Triage.
you know, strengthening some proposals.
Yeah, and I think that kind of outside of the catalyst or the California Jobs First discussion, we could be a lot more, you know, it's like the difference between a very organized prosperity network and CIRC, where you could just get a lot more done if you don't have the constraints of this project that's forcing you to stay within the lines. So I think that after this after we get through this, once we have worked together and developed this relationship, then we could be more ambitious in our goals outside of what California Jobs First is asking for. But right now, those are the rules we play by. And this group,
Yes.
as it's not an official group, we're not, we have not been selected, approved by the collaborative. We're kind of self-selecting. We can't make any decisions. We could be advisory, but we're limited on things that we could say yes or no to, because we don't have like the blessing of the collaborative as an elected body.
Yeah, and I think, Bridget, thanks for putting that slide in there. You know, the framing for this approach, this recommendation, which basically still stands with a few little, I think, refinements to sort of the internal process with once projects were to come over to us, was that, we're looking to the sector table leads and the sector tables to come up with a subset of the total 80 or 100 or more projects that are currently contemplated that span 5,000 to over 25 million each in cost. A subset of those that would be like, these are the ones that we think are the most, that meet our regional strategies the best, or would help us move in that direction. And those would be the ones that this group would kind of dive most deeply into. So that was a bit of a linear path model, and I think given some of the timing issues that we talked about earlier, it's not that this approach is out the window. It just might be we're not, I guess, formally in a place to evaluate projects or something to that level. Is that right, Amanda?
Sorry, I'm just reviewing the slide now, and I want to apologize. When Bridget, you asked me if you consider projects outside, I was thinking from the perspective of the collaborative as a whole and not this group, and that's, I think, the source of the confusion. So when Catalyst starts, we have 4 positions that we will be recruiting called sector investment coordinators, and they are welcome to help to assist and consider projects as long as they see that they are aligned. They're not constrained by the state criteria necessarily. So I was just thinking, yes, of course, they can look at housing projects if that's part of the strategy that they're trying to fund. But for this group, it's up to you guys in a way, I think, how you want to play it strategically. I'm just going to share here because I think it's when and how we evaluate projects is kind of, we're still setting our timeline, but you can look and see how Steve Frisch's, how Sierra Business Council is charting the course. We have a similar thing. So we're going to be looking to bring projects to through a formal application process beginning September 1st. And that's why you guys don't have any applications to look at, because there hasn't been an application process yet. And most regions, I think, are on the same timeline that we are. What we have in the inventory, I think it's great to start and explore and case study maybe some of those. But you'll find that it's not really detailed enough information to evaluate anything. And we won't have that until we have formal applications in.
And this has been the frustration with the whole project, right? It's hurry up and wait. We've got stuff that we have to get done, but we can't do it until we meet other qualifications first. Again, we have to work within the kind of the scope of the contract for that. But I really want to build this as a long-term thing so that we're not as tied to that scope and we can use it more effectively.
Well, the link you just put in there is super helpful, and we should just borrow liberally from that, because it does lay out, that we're and I think we're moving into very similar approach with the pre-RFP project support workshop series. So one thing that we'll be able to do as technical assistance providers is to hold office hours to, offer those to, again, to work directly and work with RGS support. That is different from bringing the projects to this group to sort of discuss and understand and make recommendations about. And I think there's probably value in both type things. Of course, we can do it as a professional kind of service as part of our contract. But I would think that, part of strengthening the muscle of the economic development finance and funding, just understanding and also applying that to specific projects would be useful to have as a subject for this group. And it's just the question of which projects would you want to spend and at 90 minutes focused on, or half of that time, 45 minutes, or let's say, and with so many, how do we select some to focus on? And Amanda, thanks for raising your hand.
Right? Talk a lot and I feel bad about it. But I think one thing that's been tough, and it's the one thing that both myself and our state counterparts agree on, is that it's been really hard to get people to embrace the regional roadmap, right? As like something that is useful. And everyone just wants to skip right to funding projects here and there, however we can. And I think if I could get your all help in embracing the roadmap and doing maybe something like what Greg suggested, right? But with an eye to those strategies. So one of the strategies from arts, culture, tourism is creative placemaking. You could look at, identify all the Oryx, the Garbervilles, the Willets, the Clear Lakes all over our region and say, what would it mean to do Main Street revitalization projects across all of those to make each of them a destination unto themselves? What's the dollar figure? What are the tools that we could use? I think that the sector tables need help getting more concrete. If you look at some great examples like Fresno Drive, they have a dollar figure for each of their strategies. They know exactly the investment that's needed. And I think that that's part of the technical expertise that we could really use.
And we're looking for the sector tables to develop that level of insight into the regional scale. Okay.
Yeah, and the sector tables have funding to hire consultants to help them too. So it's not like we're expecting one
Okay.
person to know everything.
Okay. Well, we're getting about 5 minutes before the end of our 90 minutes. This is all always helpful for me to better understand the scope of our task. But Susan, what were the points that, do we have enough time to get into the admin topics that you wanted to cover?
Just peppering them in throughout because it's fit with so much with the conversation, which is, that we are a body that is not appointed. So we have to make sure we remain in advisory capacity. We're building the foundation right now for those, to really look at those projects that are coming up. So thank you for bearing with us and for educating yourself on kind of the broader scope of finance. People that we invited to participate in this, we brought because you have some sort of expertise in finance, whether it's, infrastructure financing through a government or philanthropy or business financing, capital stacking. But if you know of people who have expertise that's not in the room right now, who's in the area, if you want to bring them into the circle so that we have a better idea, when somebody comes to us, we just have more resources in the room. So if they bring in a project, we have the broadest financing experience that we can get. The other thing is we have not been to this point, really, we've not invited you guys to officially be part of the collaborative. Most of you are, but if there's anybody who is in the room now who has not filled out a collective partnership agreement letter or a data collection and payment form, we would really appreciate that so that the state counts you as legitimate. If you don't turn in those forms, then you're just kind of a resident of the community. You're not part of the collaborative by the state's minds. So if you've not filled it out, I can actually put some in the email, and you can get them back to us. Pam Long, Pam Long, who's on here, she is our new administrative assistant. So she's getting all of that out. And because you're here and you're helping us out, you can get a stipend for $100 per day. So if you're in multiple groups, you can only go to one meeting a day, or get paid for one meeting a day. But if you'd like to get a stipend for attending these meetings, that is possible. And that's really it. Let me post those two things to here, the forms that you need to fill out if you haven't, and then you can just email them to me and I'll get them to Pam. And that's it for me.
Okay, well, I think for us, we can follow up with email kind of on what we are really wanting to do is open up an office hours function. So we have a recommendation for how we can do that. We'll work with Susan and Amanda just to make sure that that is a equitable process, but that would allow us to have some level of engagement at the project level and begin, answering questions. And we're also going to be connecting with the sector table leads and seeing what support we might be able to provide them towards, I think, some of the, topics that you just brought up, Amanda. So those are kind of two actual steps that we're prepared to take. And then, June 3rd, we have the focus on new market tax credits. We're going to get a deep dive into that. And then we'll meet again in mid-June. And hopefully by then we'll be able to have action on the office hours component and some having met with the sector table leads. So anything else for the good of the order? Okay, thank you all for spending an hour and a half with us.
Thanks. And Greg, you're all good. I have it. I just checked.
Oh, good.